In Mark chapter 5, Jesus had cast demons out of a man who had been possessed by so many they referred to themselves as Legion. Now, this had been somebody that everybody in town knew. They had tried to help, or at the very least to subdue him all sorts of ways, and it had all failed. So for him to be better, it's going to attract attention. And there was the minor fact that when the demons were cast out of the man, they went into a herd of swine, and 2,000 pigs ran off a cliff and drowned. Something like that, as soon as Jesus comes to town, is going to attract attention. And not all of it will be good. In Mark chapter 5, continuing with verse 14, the herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country. And people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone marveled. As Jesus traveled through Israel, whenever he cast out demons or healed the sick, it often attracted large crowds of people eager to experience the same sort of relief and healing in their own lives. But not so in this Gentile region where Jesus visited. Here, it got a different reaction. Here, they were afraid, seeing God's power unleashed. Afraid because they could recognize the dramatic change that the demon-possessed man had undergone. Afraid because of the great price that change had come at, in the form of that herd that had drowned. And whatever might have been motivating them, these folks didn't ask for Jesus to stay while they lined up all their sick and their afflicted for his healing touch. These people asked Jesus to leave. They could recognize great power at work. They could clearly see the difference that it made, but they didn't want to upset the status quo. At the end of the day, even if some people had to suffer for it, like the demon-possessed man, they were more comfortable with life the way they knew it than the sort of potentially even painful change that Jesus might bring about if he stayed any longer. And sometimes as we come to know Jesus, it's like that. Sometimes the change that Jesus wants to bring about in our lives comes at a price. And as we really start to recognize just how dramatic a change it is, when we really start to recognize how great the cost to truly be his completely devoted follower is, some people aren't on board with that. They're okay as long as Jesus is doling out some benefits, but life pretty much stays the same. But when it starts costing us something, some of us would just as soon see Jesus depart than we would to undergo the change that he wants to bring about. Yet this man recognized that the change that he had underwent was worth it. So much so that as Jesus left, he wanted to go with him. But Jesus wouldn't allow him to. Now, there might have been some practical reasons for that. Coming from a Gentile region, it's very unlikely that this man would have been able to have been much use to Jesus in Israel. He wouldn't have been able to go to many of the places that Jesus went. His testimony would have been a lot less powerful in Israel. These people hadn't known how bad he had been, so no matter how much he told it, he'd still be a stranger. But back home where the people weren't ready yet for Jesus, his ongoing presence could be an ongoing testimony, because they did know how bad he'd been. They knew what a mess his life was, and they could see now how in order Jesus had made things. They could recognize how great the mercy that God had shown him was, so he could continue to proclaim. And while they weren't ready at that moment for Jesus, over time, as they saw the effect that Jesus had had on someone they knew, they might just be drawn to him. And this is the opportunity for us as we come to know Jesus. There's a word of warning that there is a price, that the change Jesus wants to produce in us might be uncomfortable. It's going to change our status quo, and we need to be ready for it. But there's also a word of encouragement that when we know Jesus, when we recognize his mercy in our lives, if instead of telling him to depart, we go everywhere talking about how great he is, even those that aren't ready to follow him right now might be drawn to him as they see how great his mercy's been in our lives and start to realize just how much they might